Great. Hello. It's lovely to see so many people here. I'm Barbara. I'm the Chief Executive of Making Music. And for those of you who are not familiar with Making Music, it is the UK Association for Leisure Time Music Groups. And we have about 3,800 such groups in membership across the UK. And they comprise around 200,000 hobby musicians. So we are hosting the event today, but the main talking and answering of questions will be done by a panel of people very committed to helping to make changes to ensure that the climate emergency is addressed. So it is my great pleasure now to introduce first Ben C, who is a singer and choir leader, and it's at his idea that we came up with this event. But also speaking will be three other people: Nina Vinther, who's a singer, Alison Burnley from Oi Musica, who will tell you more about that organisation, and Chris Hutchings, who's a composer and the person who started the Choirs for Climate Change website. But over now to Ben.
Hi everybody, really nice to be here, and quite a few faces and names I recognise from various things and various corners of the world. So yeah, thanks for being here. My name's Ben. I'm a singer, composer and choir leader, and really I'm here because it's something I've been thinking about for a while, and with the choirs that I lead, it's something we've been talking about in sessions, and I've been trying to really sort of think about how choirs in particular can respond to the climate crisis. And I think I recognise in the groups that I run, the kind of community music groups that I lead, just like everybody else here, are a kind of real commitment to community and the kind of good-naturedness of getting together to make music. And within that same movement, there's a real sense of kind of wanting to do good and doing good. And, you know, kind of responding to the climate change feels like the obvious, natural next step, and something that my members were keen to talk about and I wanted to engage with as well. Yeah, and I'm sure we're going to talk loads about that this afternoon, but that's sort of where I'm coming from. So I'm not particularly necessarily well informed on anything. I come from a place of wanting to be better informed and wanting to make a little bit of a difference with the groups that I lead, and also knowing a few other choir leaders and music makers who are also interested in this conversation. So there's a little bit of a network kind of brewing, which maybe we can talk a little bit about later as well. But that's me.
Nina?
Yes. Hello, I'm Nina. I am, oh no, sorry about that. I never have my phone on speaker, but suddenly today. I am 23 and I'm at uni, at Cambridge Uni. Oh my goodness, this is terrible. I'm so sorry, one sec. I didn't even know I could get it. Such a millennial, but very anti-tech. To compose myself. I am at Cambridge doing a master's in languages. I sang with Trinity College Choir in my undergrad and have sung with a few pro choirs like Polyphony and Tenebrae, obviously with kind of very busy energy intensive touring schedules, and also whilst I was on my year abroad in Munich and Paris with kind of amateur choirs there. So experience with lots of different choirs with very different personalities. And I came to the environmental question in a kind of more practical, rather than just kind of occasionally recycling and thinking everything was all right, upon hearing Greta Thunberg giving her speeches in New York. And I was there at the time, actually on a choir tour, having flown about 20 times to the same airport. And I heard words kind of, "How dare you?" I know they weren't addressed at me, but I felt in the dressing room just very anxious all of a sudden, and how something I really loved doing, singing and being with all my friends, suddenly felt like I wasn't helping music out. So that was, I'll talk a bit more to that later maybe, but I'm also really interested therefore in what practically we can do, particularly if you're a traveling choir, because there's big energy savings to be had by thinking about the way we go to rehearsals and we go to venues, and how our audience comes to venues and how we best communicate that. But also just little things like coffee cups, creating a kind of community spirit of not throwing things away, and just using every opportunity to have little conversations. And I believe very much in not just attrition as in adding up actions, but really multiplication, because if you just have the courage to have one little word with someone, they might then be empowered to speak to their neighbor, etc., etc. And I think choirs are such an amazing place where those things kind of spiral in a good way. So yeah, really excited to be here, and thank you so much for coming and for having me.
Great. Alison, if you're there, I think if you could just quickly introduce yourself.
Hi, yes, I'm Alison Burnley. I am a freelance producer, and I'm currently working with Edinburgh-based Oi Musica on a project. They started about 18 months ago called Let It Grow, which was a collective of artists getting together in the lead up to COP, which was meant to happen last year, saying, what can we do for COP? And they wrote a song with Corinne Polwart and the Soundhouse Choir in Edinburgh with the intention of creating a big street performance of the song. So it's got a lot of street band music in it, and it's also very choral based. And then, of course, another lockdown happened. Everything stopped happening last year. And so they made it into a music video, and off the back of that music video, have created a digital project inviting choirs, individuals, artists from around the world to create their own version of the song or a creative response to climate change. So I'm here representing that project.
Great, thank you. And Chris.
Yeah, I'm a composer and general music choirs person. I do a bit of directing, a bit of singing, a bit of accompanying. And I also run Choirs for Climate, which is essentially a repository of loads of music that choirs can download, mostly for free. And there's a few which are published by other companies and use freely for any sort of climate work. That can be concert, it can also be protest, street performance, virtual choirs, recordings, and so on. And it's also a sort of central point of contact for any choirs who want to get further information, resources, and find events that are related to climate as well.
Great. And yes, I was interested in the recent XR protests in London. Certainly that music played a very large part in that. But so I'm going to go as first speaker to Nina, because she does have to dash off possibly before the end of the meeting.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, so I think people will speak very fullily to the kind of imaginative and fun and creative aspects of being musicians in a choir and all the things that can be done there. And particularly, I just wanted to notice, because for my master's, I'm kind of studying music and through an eco-critical lens, and I've been so thrilled to see so many musical organizations, really well-known ones, doing so much more. So if you're kind of a consumer of music as well as a performer, things like the Leeds Leader or Oxford Leader, or museums, lots and lots of people are doing stuff. So definitely have a look around, because there's so much to be inspired by and kind of make it not just about the practical. However, there are very brilliant things we can do. A bit more background on me. Whilst I was in my final year at Trinity Choir, the final tour was going to be to Canada, and having been to America and realized what the carbon footprint was that we'd kind of racked up, I was like, oh, I think actually I don't really want to do that anymore. And I didn't really see it as a boycott, but that's kind of how it was perceived. I think maybe it was more of a conscientious objection. For some perspective, I think the flight just there and back would be a ton. An average, I'm going to get to that, but it's a huge amount of carbon. So I said no. The result of that was that the whole tour was kind of cancelled and then reimagined as a UK outreach tour. So it does just show that even you as a little person kind of wearing your heart on your sleeve with respect to climate stuff really can go a long way. But not that many organizations have the massive privilege of touring. So I think I also wanted to just show that things can go on a smaller scale and give you some resources that might help in the conversations. I can share my screen. So transport is a big one. I love transport. I love biking. I love walking. In Cambridge, we're obviously very spoiled. I think it's the highest like area in the UK in terms of cycling. I think 50% of adults cycle at least once a week, which is absolutely amazing. So it feels very safe. I appreciate where other people are. It might not feel as safe. It might be very cold on the roads. It's not the nicest thing in midwinter to be going out in your high vis. It's not very fashionable. But cycling is a great mode of transport, or e-biking. And this is just a thing that you might perhaps print off and have around or just circulate. I think with this fuel crisis currently, it's definitely getting people thinking about those shorter journeys and which journeys in a car are a kind of want and would be easy and nice, and which are an absolute must. So yeah, these are taken from a really great book called How Bad Are Bananas, which is very fun. You can also make a great quiz for a quiz night, getting people to guess which is more carbon intensive, a volcano eruption or like a Land Rover. And people get very confused. So that's a fun game that I would recommend playing. But these are just some taken from the book on the kind of the carbon footprints for various miles, and just thinking about that, whether you could make a small switch and give yourself a pat on the back, or whether you could challenge each other to take journeys, or to have a kind of a car-free week if you choose a nice day. Obviously with British weather, that's very tricky, very capricious. So that's a small scale thing. Then this was just a bit more to the people who are interested in the flying, how we kind of travel on tour. I don't know whether these conversations would extend into ones. Often in choir we're talking about our holidays, so it's another opportunity, if you so choose, to kind of just say, oh, I took an amazing Eurostar journey to Paris rather than flying. Or if you're going up to Edinburgh, kind of celebrating those journeys that are made by train, or kind of that are about the journey rather than the destination. There was someone who I was with recent, oh yes, it was at a Flight Free UK pledge party, who are a brilliant organisation. But there was a guy there who's been working in this kind of campaigning much longer than I've been alive. But he said now that he really chooses which kind of which stories to celebrate, and if someone's off, obviously not wanting to demonize, but he won't go, oh my goodness, absolutely amazing, to something that is not amazing from a kind of global justice environmental perspective. And I thought that was quite interesting, someone who had had a lot of experiences and was choosing not to celebrate those things, partly because of the facts that you'll see at the side, that although the aviation industry only accounts for about 3.5% of global emissions, about 82% of the global population has never flown at all. And then 1% of people cause half of global aviation emissions. And plane passenger numbers dropped in 2020, but are projected to rise in the long term, unless we kind of really reassess our relationship to that culture of flying for holidays at very cheap ticket prices often. So that's a little bit of the why. And then this may be helpful to some of you, even with planning personal trips perhaps. But if your choir was to say go to France for a little tour, everyone's very excited and not really wanting to think about the way we're getting there. This is just a really interesting thing to think about, what the various carbon footprint implications are of doing different things. So it's not a commitment to not flying at all, but it's just a way of seeing what savings you could make, and kind of bringing everyone on board in the process and making everything really transparent. And I'm very happy to circulate this afterwards. This is actually used by Trinity College now when they're making grants to people wanting to go on long haul flights. And I was part of a working group that put this to college and said, maybe we no longer fund long haul flights when there is a train option, or when there is a train option within Europe, say. Yeah, so just things to think about. You may have thought about them before, and of course you'll know your choir best and what gets your choir's energy going, what people want to talk about. You know, it might not be flying, but people might be really passionate about recycling. You might have someone who makes a delicious vegan muffin for the breaks. So just really play to your choir's strengths, I would say, and one thing at a time, because I think one action inspires countless more. Yeah.
Brilliant. Nina, we have one quick question, which is the 988 kilo CO2 per person from the flight to London to Washington?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, per person. And there was a person who kind of mentored me through this, saying no to the Trinity flight, that said, yes, the plane will fly anyway, but you're part of changing a culture, and also your plane won't fly. So seeing it in that sense. And I think there's always this tension between individual action and systemic change. And I don't think they're separate things. Maybe I have a slightly skewed sense of power because I kind of am in an institution like Trinity College that has an endowment of £1.5 billion and a choir that's one of the best ones in the world. So actually any changes that they make will kind of reverberate and resonate around the world. But that's not to say that within your communities, choirs have invariably fantastic reputations and include so many people. They include families, they include friends, they include kind of maybe local mayors. So by doing stuff, you really are being such a credit to yourself and helping the whole community out, I think, because you've got so many different footholds.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant, thank you. And I think that one of the things also that you just said was about small actions, that you don't need to feel that you need to change the world tomorrow, but actually on the nicking someone else's line, every little helps as well. So Nina, shall we move on then to Alison, if Alison would tell us a bit more about COP26 and what Oi Musica are doing?
Yeah, so I gave you a bit of an introduction there, and I'll talk a bit more about what. So the song is called Enough is Enough, and there is an invitation to all of you and anyone else you want to spread the word to create your own version of the song and upload to your social platforms. It was written by Corinne Polwart, and it's sung as if Mother Earth is singing to us about, I gave you everything you need and you keep taking more, and enough is enough. It's a beautiful song that starts with a lot of pathos and builds into this beautiful celebration of hope for the future. And I cried when I first heard it. It's really flexible as well. So if you are an individual who sings in your bedroom or the shower, or if you're a 100-piece choir or a street band, there's ways into this song. We've had a hip hop group in Glasgow do some stuff. We've had spoken word versions, carnival youth bands from 6 cities across the UK working remotely and creating a piece that will be released next week. So there's a real scope to put your own flavour on the song. And we've got heaps of resources on our website, which I put in the chat box, but I'll just pop it in again. On there, you'll find the original song plus some others that have come in, and you'll also find scores. So we've got the full original score on there, and then there's also a 2-part and a 3-part choral version. The 3-part can be done totally a cappella. The 2-part would benefit from some piano accompaniment, but again, you can be creative and take it on any journey you like. And then there's also a resource pack on there for schools, which is aimed at primary age children, which has a range of activities to look at climate change on a wider basis other than the song. So there's some science experiments in there to demonstrate global warming, land ice versus sea ice melting and how that affects sea levels, etc. And some really beautiful literacy projects as well. So there should be something for everyone on that site. So whatever your genre is, size of choir, or whether you're just instrumental, there's definitely scope to get involved. The idea is that we create a tidal wave of music online, and we then hope to take that to COP as well. And we're just in discussions with them at the moment about how we can be represented, alongside doing another panel discussion about how exactly this, about how can we instigate change through music, and showcasing some of those videos that have been created. So that's it really. It's an invitation to you all.
Great. I was going to ask you how you know, whether you're going to get a space at COP26. So you're hoping that you will, right?
We're working on it.
Okay.
They are slow to give us answers.
Okay.
We have some really great advocates within the UN who are sort of championing us being there. So, but there's no promises as yet.
Okay.
Mm.
Great, or well, not so great, but hopefully there will be a good outcome. And so, Chris, do you want to talk about what you've been doing?
Yeah, so Choirs for Climate, basically, Oi Musica is a great example of the sort of thing we're hoping to do. We're making music available for any choirs who want to perform all or part of their concert or street protests or flash mobs or whatever based on climate change. So I want to talk about for a moment about a similar project to Oi Musica's, which is one that Music Declare's Emergency are running. And they've commissioned an arrangement from Mark DeLissa, who wrote the arrangement Stand By Me for Harry and Meghan's wedding, the royal wedding. And he's arranged the Louis Armstrong song, What a Wonderful World, for us. And for that, like Oi Musica, we have scores available to download. It's for SSA or SATB choirs. And there's a piano backing track. An instrumental backing track is being produced and will be available in the next few days. And we're looking to get performances of that on the 30th of October, or videos before that. But the music is available for general download and use outside that date as well. So I've been quite involved with promoting that. And we also have a lot more at Choirs for Climate, thanks to John, who's already posted the link to it in the chat, so I'll pop it in again. So on that page, there's a lot of resources, a lot of music, that most of which is free to download. There's a few links to published music. Stainer and Bell have been doing a series called Choral Now, with new pieces by Rhiannon Vandal and Lisa Robertson, which are great if you have a slightly more advanced choir. There's music for all levels there. So yeah, and I'm working on getting that arranged into unison, small choirs, SADB and larger choirs, sections. The unison section is already up. So whatever you're looking for, there will probably be something there that meets your needs. And if not, then it's always worth considering talking to a local composer about it, or maybe not local. There's pieces by myself and by Ben on there at the moment. So if you're looking to create a new piece specifically for your choir that addresses climate change in a way that works for your choir, then I'd really recommend talking to any composer you know about it. We're all concerned about it. We all want to do something. And there's also probably going to be a lot of grants available for that if you're able to fundraise or apply to Arts Council England. They'll love to do something based on climate change because it's got an obvious application and need in the world. So yeah, think about commissioning a new piece as well. And if you've got any particular needs for your choir repertoire, just drop me a message in the chat and I'll suggest a couple of things on there. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris. And the Choirs for Climate does not just have music, it also has tips on how you can, become a more eco-friendly choir. So, and presumably, Chris, you'd be open to people sending in suggestions as well to add to that page, right? Absolutely,
yes. If anyone's got guest posts on how their choir has become more climate friendly, even in a small way, we'd love to hear them. There's a guest post from Dan from Love Soul Choir about going paperless, for example. And he's talked about how he switched his entire choir to using Kindles and tablets. which you're obviously, it saves paper in the long run. If you're buying a tablet just for your choir, then that's probably not such an environmentally friendly decision. But if you have a choir who've all got them already and you want to learn how to use them, then that's worth reading.
Brilliant. Yes, and I think one of the issues that you mentioned there as well is that travel to and from a rehearsal, is quite a significant thing. And obviously, the more rural you are, the harder that is. In London, I don't really need a car at all, but obviously that isn't the case in kind of the middle of Yorkshire or something. So that is quite a tricky thing to resolve there. But yeah, thank you, Chris. And Ben, now you're a choir leader, so you've probably tried a lot of things already.
I am a choir leader, but I'm also very aware that this is about music groups more generally. So hopefully some of the things we're talking about in relation to choirs can be applied to wind bands and orchestras and whatever music group you might be involved with. I thought I'd talk a little bit more broadly about the ways in which choirs can kind of get involved. Most of the work I do is with community groups, which come in all different sort of shapes and sizes. And I'm kind of interested in bringing communities into this discussion and kind of how we can go about doing that. And actually, a couple of years ago when I was starting to kind of dip my toe into this giant sea, I was a bit nervous about that. But now that I've been doing it a little bit, I'm kind of deeply warmed by actually the fact that most people are having these conversations anyway. And, most of the groups I'm working with are having these conversations, wanting to have these conversations, and it doesn't feel at all combative. It feels, like a sort of almost like a warm hug, really, because people are really open to this conversation. So yeah, I thought I'd talk a little bit about kind of the ways in which I've been thinking about that, and I've kind of divided it into 3 categories, really. And the first one is message and awareness, because I think community groups are really, really well placed to be amazing change makers, really. We are right at the beating heart of communities, and we speak to communities, and even beyond that, kind of the communities that we engage directly with, then in concerts and in discussions and going to the pub after rehearsals and things, we reach quite widely. So when I'm thinking about message and awareness, I'm kind of thinking about things like the choice of repertoire, fundraising. If you're doing concerts, could you have a collection at the end for whatever cause it might be, whether it's a local thing or something broader. Just generally spreading the word and community engagement, and thinking about your audience and kind of what you're saying to your audience, and then supporting campaigns and issues and getting behind projects. And I think that's what community music groups are brilliant at anyway. And it might just be about a case of kind of channeling them in the right direction, and sort of bringing climate into those kind of thoughts that all music groups are having anyway. The other 2 camps are, well, the choir's carbon footprint or music group's carbon footprint, which Nina has kind of already spoken about, but travel to and from rehearsals, touring, offsetting, if you are doing whatever it might be, thinking about ways you can kind of offset any of your emissions, and then venue choices. So for rehearsals and concerts and things, thinking about how the choir are going to get there, how the audience are going to get there. And if you've got the option to rehearse somewhere that's, kind of convenient for people to get to either by public transport or has good networks, whatever, that's great. I realise some of these things are not necessarily accessible for different groups for various reasons, but it's about having all of these things in your head and deciding where to kind of target your energies. And then the last category is the choir's impact, and that's a little bit, again, loads of this stuff is up on Chris's brilliant website, but with the choir's impact, I guess I'm kind of thinking about things like sheet music, whether it's online or dishing out sheet music every week. Simple things in choir rehearsals like reusable cups and reusable water bottles, and not having plastic cups in our tea breaks that then go straight into landfill afterwards. Another one which I'm hoping to implement in some of my groups this term is about having or nominating a green representative, somebody to, we quite often have social secretary or whoever it might be in our community groups, having someone who's a green representative, who's there to kind of, sort of champion green issues and think about that in the choir's kind of general running. And then if you're a group with a constitution, and most making music groups, I think, have to have a constitution, I think, is that right? Then actually working green issues into the choir's constitution and making that a reason for the choir to be. And then, of course, there's things like green banking and energy and things, and thinking about how the choir or music group can engage with things like that. But for me, the main thing with community groups is about inclusivity. And, you know, what we absolutely don't want to do as people who bring together community groups is start pushing people away or creating barriers to access. So I think having these kind of conversations is actually an opportunity to kind of bring your members closer in a funny kind of way and not push people away. And I'm not suggesting that after this Zoom meeting, you know, everybody should go and make sure that all of their choir members are vegan and drive electric cars. You know, it may be that is your situation, but that's likely to alienate some of your participants, and that's not the idea. I think it's really about trying to bring people with you and get people behind you, and, you know, kind of having these conversations together. If it starts to feel preachy or kind of exclusive, that's where things are going to go wrong, I think. So some of the things that Chris was talking about bringing composers on board, or bringing in, you know, getting your groups to interact with new music that they could even have put their own stamp on, is a really nice way to kind of, you know, bring your membership with you behind this issue. But yeah, I think that's probably what I've got to say for now.
Okay, sorry, I was muted. No, thank you, Ben. And I think there's already a debate going on in the chat about, you know, barriers and exclusions, you know, and people who have to drive a car, or people who may feel guilty about flying. But yeah, I mean, you know, that is not about that to some extent, is it? It's about the sort of, I'm going to go on holiday to Sri Lanka instead of Blackpool. I mean, I mean, it's a bit extreme, but, you know, there are choices that we can make, and then there are other things that are really priorities and are really important, like seeing your family, if you know, if that's the thing. So, and I know that sometimes for me it's laziness. You know what I mean? I could get on the bike, but it's raining. So yeah. So just I could try harder, I feel, in a lot of times. I'm sure I'm not the only one. I hope I'm not the only one. So questions, Sharon, you've been following the chat?
I've been trying to, but I've also been taking the register, so I may not have seen everything.
Okay.
Can I add a tiny thing, Barbara?
Yeah.
Just to that last point. With the preachiness, I probably am sometimes preachy, but I'm not trying to, increasingly, I'm not trying to get people necessarily to change immediately, because that's just not going to happen. And, you know, everyone is in a completely different boat if we're all on the same sea. But even the sea, and for some people, is so much worse. I think keeping that global perspective of, like, it might feel radical to not drive this one day, but your family isn't about to drown in a flood. So I mean, just having that, and that's not to say that we should always be thinking about that, because that's just absolutely exhausting. But what I think is useful in all of these conversations, and it can, in my experience, it has been very intense conversations sometimes, but then, like, we're still friends. I think, if anything, like, the relationship is a lot clearer afterwards, is that you just, like, being really honest with how it makes you feel, and particularly as someone who is young and has grown up, like, having a lot of stuff that is very calm and intense, and, like, not necessarily being told that liking fashion, because everyone's like, you should buy this dress, has really bad implications. So being so much part of the problem, but also trying to solve it, like, it's a really hard place to be in. So I think the best conversations are ones that are just so, like, really truthful and are speaking to your experience, rather than trying to say, like, well, what about this person, or, like, you have to feel this, because ultimately everyone feels completely different.
Great. So the other thing we did talk, so we talked about barriers. I think the preachiness is really important, and also like I say, the emphasizing the small changes. You know what I mean? That everybody, every person, and every music group, you know, they can decide what they're, what they want to do. And, so it depends also, that bigger picture, I think, is a really good one, and one that is increasingly being put in front of us actually through news, because we are seeing, increasing refugee problems, increasing, floods, fires, and all that in places that didn't have them before. So it is becoming quite graphically visible, and to my children, who are, Nina, about your age. So yes, there's a lot there that they worry about for their future. Any more questions? Offsetting, Judith, is there a question here? Ben, you mentioned offsetting, the issue is about balance. Judith, do you want to unmute and explain what you mean? Is that a question?
Hi, yeah, it wasn't particularly a question, it was just a comment really, because we're talking very much about CO2 and carbon and using Earth's resources, but there's the other side of the coin as well, which I think is also important, which is about the offsetting. It's about what we can do for the environment as well, not just in terms of how we consume things, but also putting back things into so that we actually can sequestrate the CO2, for instance, and that, those types of activities that we could do.
Yeah, very good point, Ben.
Yeah, just in response to that, thanks, Judith, and I totally agree. And actually, through making music, I did a project a few years ago called Adopt a Composer, where I worked with a youth orchestra, and we wrote some music together. And they were all really, really fired up about climate change. We ended up having a slightly loosely a climate-themed piece. And then after that project wrapped up, they then sort of tried to offset the sheet music that had been printed for that project by doing a huge tree planting project with both of their orchestras. And it's, I don't know kind of how it worked out in terms of like for like, but it was, as a gesture, a really nice idea. And again, then their parents got involved in that day, and it kind of, the conversation continued, and it was a really nice moment.
Brilliant. No, I like that. And as Judith said, that it's not just reducing your impact, but also putting something positive in. I think that's a really good message. And someone's posted in a chat about uniforms. So it is about, it's like in our daily life, it's about everything that we use, isn't it? So, how easy is it to get things that are made from environmentally sustainable materials? How expensive would that be? Someone's written about, charity shops. Yes, my children seem to shop exclusively at charity shops, which is great. So that stuff is already, that its carbon footprint has already happened. And this is my justification for driving an ancient car, because buying a newer one also has implications on just building that thing in the first place. So so even for things like uniforms, you can think about alternatives. Any other questions or comments?
Barbara, can I?
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that I think the ripple effect is really quite profound. And so we were just talking about offsetting and tree planting. So for example, this week, there's an amazing project in Glasgow called The Lost Woods, which sees every primary school in Glasgow planting trees. So they've been growing oak saplings from acorns through lockdown, and they're now planting a 13-hectare woodland for future children of Glasgow. And we've been down there teaching them the song to give them some context around the planting and what they're doing for their planet. And the ripple effect that we're already seeing through them then talking to their parents about that and their grandparents about that is huge. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of music makers going out and being visible, creating content about this, because it begins conversations. And I think we need to remember that there's power in that.
Definitely. And I wonder also whether in your programs, if you do concerts and if you do printed programs or online programs, whatever, on your, sort of digital programs, you could write about your choices. You know what I mean? You could say, we are wearing, clothes we already own. We haven't bought anything. We are using Kindles because of reducing our paper use, etc. Someone this morning in a meeting had a good idea for a program where they just have one copy and people photograph it on their phone as they come in, so that stops them having to search endlessly on their phone for the right link, and they got it there. So I just thought that was quite nice, and printing one sheet of paper rather than printing 200 programs or something. Okay, I'm just scanning through. Sharon, I might have lost the plot here.
I haven't seen anything else.
Right, so there's some talk about venues. So yes, I mean, the pandemic has not really helped, because we are probably producing a lot more plastic. I'm just thinking of the endless testing and throwaway face masks and all that stuff. But also, yes, absolutely, if you need larger venues, if you need to use ventilation, that is also going to have a carbon footprint implication. Someone is promoting a charitable organisation that offers free training for anyone who's interested in engaging with their local MP or council about climate change. Hope for the future. So if you can stick a link. And also if we can have a link to the tree planting project in Glasgow, please. Chris, do you want to just explain that? Because I think that would be a really helpful thing.
Distinction between offsetting and tree planting. A lot of commercial companies will offer offsetting for your flights and so on, which is not particularly great. I'm sure there are some good projects out there which will offset your carbon, but with the recent forest fires in Europe, quite a few of those forest fires have been in tree plantations which were planted for carbon offsetting. So obviously those have now been extremely counterproductive. Offsetting is going to be, God damn it, sorry. Carbon offsetting for a flight is not a sustainable method of getting things done. It's basically like saying, oh, I've not robbed a house, so this other person is allowed to rob a house instead. It's not going to actually change the emissions. So if you can reduce emissions, that's much better than trying to offset them. But tree planting by itself is not the same thing. If you've got a project that's doing good tree planting, make sure you've got somebody who knows about forestry involved, so that you don't plant trees which are going to erode the soil in 50 years. But if you've got that sort of oversight, then tree planting is great.
Brilliant. And someone's also talking about something called Eco-Church Scheme. So if they have more information about that, to post that would be good, because obviously churches are used by a lot of groups as rehearsal and performance spaces. Raising awareness is absolutely a thing, and I feel that the fantastic way that music groups can do this is through music, obviously, because a song like, What a Wonderful World obviously just sticks in your head potentially more than a UN report. But yeah, so this is why I think it's great that Chris and Ben and other composers have offered free repertoire, that will hopefully help. And again, explaining to your audiences why you're singing about a particular topic, even if you're singing the lark ascending, well, possibly the lark's going to be a thing of the past if you don't do something about climate change. So, you can connect what you do to your audiences.
Yeah, can I add a point just to that, Bob? Because I think that's a really good point, and that's actually pretty much what I'm studying at the minute. It's like, what does it mean to sing the song cycle Vinther if our seasons, you know, aren't happening? Or what does it mean to sing about the nightingale singing in Berkeley Square if a nightingale hasn't sung in Berkeley Square? So that like kind of really imaginative, creative productivity are yeah, very interesting. And also they relate more to what I kind of fairly newly am aware of, is the biodiversity crisis being something slightly different to the climate change crisis. And they're definitely interlinked, but I think something that's maybe more attractive for community groups, rather than worrying too much about the carbon, because that immediately becomes quite scientific and, as Chris said, quite stressful with all of these offset things, is to like celebrate your gardens and like share tips that you have. Like maybe you've just planted some amazing tomatoes and you can give away some cuttings, or maybe you've got space for a pond. Like that's the most amazing thing you could do, and then like bring those conversations into your music, and vice versa. Maybe a garden, I'm sure some of you would have had garden parties with your choir before, or maybe there's an outdoor park venue that you can go and kind of communicate with the council and like have a little spot that you go and plant some seeds with all the families. Like there's so much that you can do that's very joyful, and that's not just kind of a sacrifice and a like, oh God, we've got to recycle, because that kind of thing produces anxiety rather than like the wonder of kind of the birds chirping, etc. So yeah, biodiversity as well is very important, and something that I think your choir would be very, yeah, have a nice time talking about, hopefully.
No, absolutely. I think that's a great point about the celebrating. You know, this is why I think that picking What a Wonderful World is such a great song, because it is saying it is such a marvelous planet. Can we please not destroy it? You know, so you don't need to say the second bit. You can just celebrate it, because I think people do know that it's under threat. Now, there's someone asking about whether music organizations are going to have to think about their climate credentials when making funding bids, i.e. declare the carbon emissions for a project. Are there any examples of this happening already? Well, Arts Council England, certainly for the national portfolio organizations and also for other projects, is already asking that you commit to net zero by 2050. So I'm just saying this as an example because Making Music had some Cultural Recovery Fund round 2 funding, and I've just written the report for that, where I need to report back on what we are doing in terms of reducing our carbon emissions. So I expect that this will increasingly become a thing, certainly for public funders. I mean, you know, separate trusts and foundations will be able to set their own rules. But yeah, for public funders, I would think that you will be expected. Any information on CO2 emissions during rehearsals? Christine, do you mean like, has anybody kind of measured that? Do you want to just tell us about that? Can you unmute?
Yeah, I'm just interested in knowing whether people have been measuring CO2 emissions during their rehearsals so they can sing without masks.
Oh, okay, that's more of a COVID question rather than a climate question, right? So on that, yes, a lot of people have been buying CO2 monitors, I'll just say briefly, and they are a very good way of measuring that. Depending on the sizes of hall, you might need 2, and you want to buy not the cheapest, you want to buy one in a range of 85 to 110 pounds, and you want to use it at head height in front of singers. So just a quick thing on that.
Thank you.
So, oh, Julie's bicycle, someone has mentioned. Yes, I haven't looked at them. Catherine, do you want to tell us about what resources they have?
I was trying to respond to the question around measurement tools. And my understanding is that the Creative Green tools do provide a quick opportunity for people to enter certain key data about things that they do in order to get an estimate of carbon footprint. And there's a lot of other things, including case studies about a range of art making practices And I know that they've worked in collaboration with the Association of British Orchestras to come up with some recommendations for orchestras in the UK. Just wasn't sure if this was something that people were generally aware of.
Interestingly, someone's also saying that they're still, or they are going to carry on doing blended rehearsals with some people online and some in person. So that also means that you could have fewer journeys because not everybody might be there in person every time. So I think, again, that's helpful. And I wonder whether the increasing working from home might also help for that. So do we know any good initiatives from instrument manufacturers and those that use natural raw materials rather than plastics? So P-bone surely is plastic, right? John, do you know more about them?
Yeah. I just want to jump in quickly. There is an event on this next month from Music Declares Emergency called Classical Declares, and I've just dropped a link to that in the chat, and that'll be online as well. So anyone who's interested in orchestral sustainability, do head along to that.
Oh, fantastic. Great. So I don't know, John Woods, do you know any more about instrument materials that we could learn? No.
Yeah, so also worth pointing out that the normal material for trombones is metal, and metal has an immense carbon footprint even compared to plastic because there's so much heat required to make it. And so plastic trombones are an improvement.
Great, that is helpful to know. And I know that the P-bone people claim to be the first carbon neutral instrument manufacturer in the world. I'm loving, Chris, your idea of play Haydn's Farewell Symphony and have each orchestra member dressed as an endangered species. For those of you who don't know, the Farewell Symphony sees a member of the orchestra leave over the course. So by the end, there's nobody left. So actually, I'm liking that a lot. Chris, you must put that on your website. I think that's a nice one. Oh, sorry, your choirs, but yes. Car sharing is mentioned, and you've put the link to the classical thing. I'm just scrolling through. So the classical music thing, I think, will be interesting. So if you want to have a look at that, those of you who are instrumental, I think that would be really interesting. I see there are some sustainable clarinets, I must point out to my daughter. Nina, thank you very much for your contribution. Nina's going off to a lecture. Okay, so I think I've scrolled through most things. Ben.
Yeah, I was just going to very quickly add that this is an ongoing discussion, and so many people are thinking about it, and particularly in the music world. And I think one of the most powerful tools we can have as music makers and as people who run music groups is actually sharing these things amongst ourselves, kind of as we're doing in this chat, because so many of these things are accessible and are so sort of specific to the groups that we lead that kind of in talking and sharing these ideas amongst ourselves is such a good starting place. And it might be that what works for one group works for another group or not, but kind of the more we kind of come together as a community and share these ideas, the wider it spreads. And it's a really nice starting point. So yeah, thanks to everybody who shared some ideas. I've got some new things to try with my groups. And I suppose I'm sort of interested in whether we can sort of form somehow a little network or a little community so that people can share these ideas more readily. And I don't know whether that's something maybe making music might be able to help us with, but somewhere, a little forum or something where these ideas can be shared.
Yes, I mean, maybe an occasional meeting like this, for people just to share ideas would be a thing. And obviously, we can also have a page on our website where maybe we can point to things like Chris's, sorry, because I appreciate, Chris, that you're about choirs, and obviously we also have instrumental groups, but so where we could assemble links to useful things. So yeah, does that help, Ben? Or I mean, you know.
Yeah, that sounds great. I suppose it's yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to throw you in there. It was kind of a question up in the air. But I think one of the most useful things for me is talking to other music leaders and people who do similar things, and hearing what they're doing, and kind of reacting and thinking about how some of those ideas could be applied to some of the groups that I work with. And yeah, I suppose sort of widening the net, or having somewhere where that stuff is kind of easily accessible, is one way to go about doing that as well.
Yeah, so I'm sure we could do that. I mean, you know, start with many of the links that were shared today, you know, on a web page, but also, you know, I'm very happy to talk to other organizations. You know, for instance, we could host another thing like this, you know, next term, and include ABCD, and I think there's someone here from ISM actually. I think I saw Vinota earlier in the chat, but you know, so to make sure that other organizations get a chance to get involved as well in sharing this. Okay. And music declares emergency. Yeah, okay. So I think we'd be happy to give that a go. I mean, if nobody comes, then obviously it would be pointless. But, you know, if like today, 60 people come, I think it's obviously a worthwhile exercise, and we learn something new. So, okay. So do we have any other questions or comments that I haven't seen? Do raise your hand or something if I've missed something and you want to comment or ask a question. Alison.
I just want to say, like Ben, that there's so many ideas that are coming out of this, and it would be great to formalize that in a way that is accessible to people beyond this group. But I think it's also really exciting to say there are this many people who have come today, and just the power of music making and us getting out on the street and spreading this message wider is really something quite wonderful. So just bringing it back to the music again, you know, Chris and Ben, the Oi Musica piece, there's lots of content out there available for people already. Plus, you know, I'm sure some ideas are coming through in the chat box of other music as well. There's a whole gig. There's a whole gig in the content that's available. So let's get out on the street and start singing about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so no, it's interesting because, you know, singing and making music has always been used, you know, to put messages across of one sort or another, and you know, that this message is one that many groups might want to sing or play about. Okay, great. Any other? Please do raise your hand, because there's 3 screens of you, so I might not always spot. So Sharon, can you remind me, are we kind of collating links from today and sending them to people who were here?
Yes, we will do that. I think what we will also do is we will make that into a PDF document, which we'll make available below the video when we publish it on our website. So it will also be available for people who are watching the video at a later date.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, and also that includes Nina's slides. I think she was happy for those to be shared. Okay. Great. Carbon literacy training. Wow.
Yeah, there's, I think this is supported by Julie's Bicycle, but basically carbon literacy is a project, let me find a link to it. So yeah, basically there's quite a lot of training available on this, and Upper North offered some specifically arts-oriented carbon literacy training recently, which I signed up for and got a certificate on that. I've dropped a link to that in the chat. So yes, if you're interested in knowing more about global warming and how to and what activities can be most effective in combating it, what makes the most difference. Basically, you could go and read How Bad Are Bananas, or you could sign up for carbon literacy training, or you could, well, I don't recommend doing all your own research. Yet find the people who have done lots of good research and trust their advice. But yeah, whatever way you find easiest to learn, there'll be some way of getting more information through that.
Yeah. And whatever you do it will be something that you do rather than something that you don't do. So therefore, you know, that's always the thing to bear in mind. Someone's messaged, sorry, they maybe didn't intend to make it a direct message to me, but it's about Ecosia, which is a search engine that plants trees to offset the power used. So it's like an add-on you can add to your Google Chrome or whatever other browser that you use. Sorry, how do I share that to everybody then? Let me just try and do that. So to everyone in meeting, okay, right. So that's a useful one. Great. Thanks. Diane is saying that the book that she's posted a link to, No Planet B, updates How Bad Are Bananas, because indeed How Bad Are Bananas is about 15 years old, I think, or something. So when I was reading it, I did find that some of that was out of date. So great, thanks for that, Diane. And I mean, I have to say, you know, lots of people love to hate Bill Gates, but actually I found his book, which I'm halfway through, quite useful, because it sets things out really clearly in a layperson sort of thing for me to understand. Yeah, and what is the worst thing that I'm doing, because there's so many things to think about, you know, so kind of getting it in perspective, I find he's quite good for that, for me certainly. Great. So anybody else, any other raised hands? Raise your hands now. Ben.
Can I just quickly respond to Helen's question in the chat, which is a really nice one about the sort of mental drain of some of this stuff. And I totally relate to her point about kind of finding the right balance between these things. I think the way for me was to actually bring it into the creative practice and to bring it into the choir rehearsal room, rather than kind of take it on myself and think about, oh, you know, how am I going to do this? To invite the choir on the journey with you, bring it into, if you're a composer, bring it into your work, if you're whatever you're doing. Yeah, I think I found using it creatively part of making it or finding that balance, if that's helpful. It was for me.
Yep, great. Anything else? Are there any Gaia themed music pieces? No.
I say there are a few. I've got a few on the Choirs for Climate site. They're mostly commercially published, but let me just find that page. There are recent pieces by Sarah Kirkland Snyder called Mass for the Earth. Mass for the Endangered for choir and small orchestra. New Earth by Robert Patterson. One Home by Charles Monever. And I think there is a Gaia symphony by somebody. I can't remember who exactly. I might come up and search. There's a film series, but it's John Picard. That's who. Yeah, that's composer. But yeah, have a look at the price music there. There's quite a few large-scale works for choir and orchestra with a theme of environmental stuff. Yeah.
Great. Well, if there's nothing else specifically, I'm going to wrap up here. And this is a public event, so it's not just for Making Music members. And the next one of these that we'll be holding, these public events, will be on the 19th of November on the hot topic of ventilation, when we've got a panel of academic experts telling us about ventilation. I'm sure you can't wait. But yes, if you want to sign up to that, Sharon, if you could pop the link to that in the chat. And
it's not live for booking yet, so I can't do that.
Oh, you can't do that. No, of course. Yes, I haven't finalized the details. But anyway, it'll be save that date, the 19th of November, and come back and check on our website. You can put our events page link there. Thank you. Have I missed a question from Helen, or is that the one that you were answering?
Yeah, I think that's the one Ben was addressing with the mental workload.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you everybody for coming and sharing you know, lots and lots of useful things. I'm sure you know, not just me, the panel, everybody has learned something new and will continue to share that. So I'll talk to certainly ABCD, but maybe others as well, to do a joint, another one of these, as just bill it as a network, you know, climate network meeting or something. And I'll probably try and do that for sort of January or thereabouts. So fantastic. Thank you, everybody, and have a good weekend.